there we go. We have Dr. Mike Heithaus with us today. He is going to share with us interactions between sharks and dolphins in Australia, a study group that he's spent a lot of time researching. And he's joining us from from near Fort Lauderdale. He is at Florida International University. And as I mentioned, we will be monitoring the chat, so you can submit your questions to everyone, or you can submit your questions to me at Dolphin Communication Project or Kathleen at Kathleen Dudzinski, and we will make sure that we get your questions to Mike. And I'm sure I'm going to have some questions. I am looking forward to them. So Mike, I am going to pass it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We'll see if we can get all the technology to work as seamlessly as possible here. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. So, well, thanks so much for inviting me today. It's always fun to talk about dolphins, sharks, Australia, and not coronavirus for a change. So it's great to be here. And one of the first things I want to say is that the work today, although I've had the great pleasure to work on it, I'm going to be talking to you today about a lot of work that so many amazing scientists have done. So people like Rachel Smolker, Janet Mann, Richard Connor, working on the social lives of dolphins in Shark Bay for years. And then my team working on more of the ecosystem side of things. And I'll mention some of my ex-students who have now gone on to great, bigger and better things as we go along. But I think that, one of the key kind of points of some of this work is none of it gets done alone. It's only done by big teams working together to do such amazing things. But years ago, when I started this journey of looking at how dolphins respond to sharks, I was a graduate student at Simon Fraser University. And at the time, a lot of people thought dolphins wouldn't even have to worry about sharks, that they were just too smart. And I remember getting a proposal back to study these interactions that was sent to an eminent marine mammal scientist who will remain nameless. And I got the proposal back with comments in big red block letters that obviously had been scrawled in anger, impossible to do. And so another thing for any of the younger scientists on there, impossible is just something nobody's done yet. So keep plugging away, thinking of new ways to approach questions, use the latest technology or old tried and true methods, which sometimes are good to go. And you can make some progress. So a little bit before I get started, just kind of people always ask me, how did I go from the cornfields of Ohio to working on sharks and dolphins in Australia? And interestingly enough, I remember very vividly when I was an undergraduate seeing a documentary about this crazy place in Australia where dolphins came into the shore to accept a bit of food from people, and where a group of scientists from, at the time, the University of Michigan were going and were able to study the lives of these dolphins because they came so close to shore, and they were able to see the behavior of these animals up close and personal. And one of those people that was there was Richard Connor. And Richard had been there from starting in the mid 80s and had really started to revolutionize our understanding of these dolphins. And, I was lucky enough to run into Richard at a conference and introduced myself. And months later, got an email from him saying, "Hey, would you come and be my assistant in Shark Bay?" And it didn't take long for me to answer yes. And then kind of found myself halfway around the world in this place in Western Australia, which I think, if you're to go from Ohio or Fort Lauderdale, is about as far away as you can go on the map and still be on dry land. But it's an amazing place to go to study the dolphins because, there's such relatively clear water. They're very used to people. And so they'll go about their daily lives without really changing what they're doing at all. And so, yeah, this was me as a 19-year-old kid helping Richard out in some of those first studies. And I was lucky enough during that time with Richard to then be asked to be a collaborator on a project and eventually meet my graduate supervisor who is traveling to see some of these amazing sites around the world. And it was that time with Richard studying the social behavior of dolphins that really led me to my interest in how dolphins make a living and how do they trade off getting enough food without becoming a meal for tiger sharks. And as we'll talk about a little later, I mean, Shark Bay is an amazing place, just these incredible vistas of that red soil giving way to the bay. And it was named a World Heritage Site, not for the dolphins actually, but because of its amazingly cultural and natural resources. And so, in Shark Bay, you have everything from these mounds of rock, don't look very exciting, but they actually are. These are called stromatolites. And they resemble the first life that's seen in the fossil record more than 3.8 billion years ago. And it's one of the few places in the world where you can still find them. It's got some of the world's largest intact seagrass beds in the world, so a globally significant seagrass area, and then endangered species like Australia's version of a manatee called the dugong that you see here in these pictures. But what had really put it on the map scientifically was the dolphins. And that ability to get out and see these dolphins up close. Like many dolphin projects, it's a place where it's easy to identify individuals from their dorsal fins. There's a lot of variation in the shape and size of the dorsal fins, as well as the patterns of nicks and cuts. Over the years, they've gotten up to more than 1,000 individuals that are in the database of dolphins here that are recognized based on their dorsal fins. And most of the researchers there can probably recognize 200 or 300 animals just on site without having to sort through the catalog, because those fins are so distinctive and they're seeing the same individuals day after day. It's also helpful because the group sizes there are relatively small. So, maybe a dozen animals there is a fairly big group. So you aren't wondering where everybody is, which dolphin is which all over, which can happen if you have, big groups of dolphins like my Zoom background here, taken with the Dolphin Communication Project a few years ago. And that was only a small portion of the group that we saw. Another thing that's really great about Shark Bay is that, like I said, the dolphins are pretty friendly with boats, and they will come over and they will ride on the bow for a little while. And while they're there, the great thing is that they will flip belly up. And besides looking like it's a lot of fun, what that lets us do is have a look at their underside and tell if it's male or female dolphins. So with females, you see that one opening on the underside. With males, you have a little gap there. So that helps us tell the males and the females. And then in Shark Bay, although these are bottlenose dolphins, Indo-Pacific bottlenose dolphins, they're not like the ones that we see in the Atlantic. And so they start to get spots as they get older. And you can get a sense of just about how old the dolphins are as they age based on how many spots they have. They start kind of back in the genital region very lightly, and then they move up the body, become darker and more numerous. So, that friendliness and the ability to get genders and approximate ages has really allowed Richard, Janet, Rachel, and Andrew Richards and their whole team the ability to get incredible insights into their social behavior. The dolphins, the females there, have their calves, and it's really easy to tell the newborns from the fetal folds and kind of popping up to the surface like corks. This is one of the dolphins that comes into the beach and one of her newborn calves. It turns out life is not very easy if you're a young dolphin in Shark Bay. And the mortality rate is close to 50% in the first year. And it looks like a lot of those disappearances are actually due to predation by sharks. The interesting thing, though, is that when the females lose a calf, they will quickly come into reproductive mode again and get pregnant very quickly. So probably showing a lot of that predation pressure on the population and the need to be able to have a second calf again quickly if one is lost. The calves here in Shark Bay tend to be dependent on their mothers for around 4 years, where they're getting most of their food from nursing. The females will actually get pregnant before they have weaned the calf before them. I don't know, actually, I've got to check with Janet on what the current record is, but a while ago, there was actually one animal that was still nursing a little bit at, I think, close to 11 years old. She's about the same size as her mom, but still had not gotten weaned. During this time that the babies are with their mothers, they actually start to spend a lot of time developing their foraging skills. You'll see them spending a lot of time chasing small fish belly up at the surface. I think you can kind of see the little fish here, and slowly developing those foraging skills. Once they become independent from their mothers, the younger dolphins will start to spend more time in groups of juveniles. These tend to be mixed male and female groups. Lots of time in these groups is spent socializing. You'll see lots of the social behaviors we see in Shark Bay. It's called bonding. What you see up in the upper left there, where they'll overlap their pectoral fins. I guess that's kind of like, you know, the equivalent of holding hands, or you get the dolphin equivalent of a massage here, where they'll actually use their pectoral fins to pet one another. And you see a lot of those behaviors in these juvenile groups. As the females get older, they start spending more and more time with the groups of females. And the females don't have super strong social bonds with any one individual. If you get an association level of two females spending, you know, around more than 40% of their time together, that's actually a very strong bond. They're actually much lower, and they live in a very dynamic fission-fusion society, where the females that they're spending time with seem to be driven quite a bit by what part of their individual home range they're spending time in. The males, on the other hand, as they get older, they spend, you know, less time with the juvenile groups, and eventually what they'll do is form pair bonds with other males. And Richard Connor's work and some of the work that he did before I had the pleasure of getting to go down there was found one form of what we call alliance formation. And so, you know, these male dolphins will form a very, very strong bond with one or two other males, and they may be seen together 95% of the time, or even more. And so they're almost never apart. And what'll happen is that these pairs and trios of males will find females that are receptive, and they'll kind of aggressively keep that female with them in a behavior called herding. If the female tries to swim away from them, they may attack the female. They'll chase after her, and that may last a couple weeks. The female becomes apparently less attractive to males, and then she'll go away. But the interesting thing with the females is that they actually have multiple false estrus cycles. So they will have these periods where they're attractive to the males and they're herded, but they won't conceive a calf during that time. And it's thought that this behavior actually helps to make it unclear to the males who the father of a particular calf is. Because with those females cycling again so quickly after they lose a calf, if males knew a calf, there was no way it was theirs, there might be pressure for infanticide or to kill the calf and then try to be the father of the next calf. Lots of interesting work still going on this part. But the other cool thing with these males is that one pair and trio or alliance might team up with a second pair or trio or another alliance to attack a third one to try to steal a female from them. And so at this kind of second order of alliance formation, you actually see what appear to be political interaction. So Alliance A and B may attack C one day, the next day C and B get together and attack A. So the pairs and trios are very tight, but at that second level, it's an ever-shifting group of alliances. When I went down there in the 90s, we found a whole different form of this alliance formation, where you had groups of, say, 12 males that at that level of that group of 12, they were not ever really attacking one another, but they'd sort out into pairs and trios with females on any one day or for periods of weeks. But who was in that group of pairs and trios changed. So it was very unstable at the first order, but stable at the second order. And, you know, I'd really highly recommend checking out this book. It is not called The Journey of Discovery. My computer has cut it off. It's called Dolphin Politics in Shark Bay. And it's a great book that Richard Connor wrote about his entire journey there, from the 80s through just the last couple years. And the cool thing with this book is there are links in it so you can actually go to his website and see some of the videos of the behaviors that are discussed in the book. So a pretty cool thing. And I'm not saying I like the book just because I make a small appearance in it and it describes me as having great taste in music. But anyway, my wife may disagree with that assessment, but I'm going to take it. So if you want to learn more about social behavior, the Shark Bay dolphins, especially the males, that's a great book to check out. Getting closer to the things that I worked on, I mean, the dolphins do spend quite a bit of their time foraging, and most of the time they're feeding on relatively smaller fish. So this is a fish called a long tom found near the surface. But the dolphins are eating a lot of fish. Most of the fish they're eating are not schooling fish. They tend to be species that are a little bit more solitary. They may be found in the seagrass beds or out in sandy, slightly deeper waters. Occasionally they will go and they'll catch these bigger fish like this mackerel, but those take a lot of time for them to handle. If they get a fish that big, they got to take them down to the bottom, grind them along the bottom until they pop the head off. And then they can swallow the fish whole or keep grinding it along the bottom until smaller pieces pop off that they can easily swallow. So it may look great to catch a big fish, but it may actually take them, it may not get as much kind of energy per unit time as catching a lot of smaller fish that they can just slurp right down. It is Shark Bay, so I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the one other really cool foraging behavior we see there. It turns out that groups of these dolphins carry sponges on their snouts. And what they do is they wear it like a glove. They dive down to the bottom and they drag it along the bottom. And they're wearing it so they don't scratch up their snout. And then when they kind of scare up a fish from the bottom, they'll drop the sponge, catch the fish, eat it, go back, get their sponge, and start all over again. These dolphins that carry sponges are quite a bit less social than the ones that feed in other ways. And they're usually found alone or maybe spread way out with one or two other individuals. And it looks like this behavior, it's pretty clear this behavior is mostly transmitted down matrilines. So females will teach their calves or the calves learn from their mothers. And it's mostly female offspring that pick it up, although occasionally you will see males that carry sponges. But the females that do this is pretty much the thing that they do all the time for feeding. Whereas the males, it doesn't seem like, we don't have as much information on them because it's very rare that we see them with the sponges. There is quite a bit of variation in the size of sponges that the dolphins use. Some have the bigger ones. Have these cute little tiny ones that just barely fit on the end of their snout. And it probably does take a little bit of practice to learn about how to use these sponges. I mean, we were following a group of juveniles one time and actually had this dolphin in it that had this cute little sponge. And then another, this is a juvenile female, and a juvenile male that was in this group, I guess, was going to try to impress her and came up to the surface with a gigantic sponge. It was so big it covered his blowhole, and he kind of like flopped around and floundered trying to breathe, and then finally dropped it. Forget it. We've never seen him with one since. And so, it may take a lot of practice to be good at this, and that may be one of the reasons that it tends to be passed down matrilines rather than other individuals just picking it up. Now, you'd think that with those amazing seagrass beds, that getting a meal should be super easy, and starvation should never be a risk for these dolphins. But we do see dolphins that appear to be energetically stressed, and you can see this one here in the middle. That it's kind of sunken in here behind the head, which suggests that, it's not getting enough food to eat. And so, that really is one of the risks that the dolphins in Shark Bay face. The other is sharks, and probably what, a lot of people came to see. And it turns out that more than 70% of the dolphins in Shark Bay have scars from where they've been attacked by sharks. And so in this animal, you see this is a very large crescent-shaped wound on the back, where a large tiger shark has actually had this dolphin in its mouth. And so, that's pretty incredible. And from watching these animals through time, one thing that we found was that those bites actually heal. And it turns out that if we look at the fresh bites on the dolphins, probably more than 10% of the population is bitten by sharks in any one year. So I see a question here from Malcolm. Malcolm, if you want to unmute, I'm happy to answer your question. And I apologize if that question was from 7 slides ago and I just saw.
And Malcolm, I'm trying to unmute you, but it's actually not letting me, even though I'm the host. So if you want to type your, oh, there it goes.
There we go.
Just
You hear
a
me
delay.
now?
Gotcha.
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. Thank you very much for having me on. I want to say that I bought a copy of that book, Dolphin Politics in Shark Bay, and it's very hard for me to follow because he says, Group BTC came to AB, and then they split off, and J went to Pod C. I can't follow it. But why do you suppose that the dolphins choose to live in such an unfriendly zip code?
Well, I think part of it is that many zip codes end up being unfriendly at some level. I mean, in a lot of cases, in areas where there may be less sharks, it may be harder to get more food. I think here in Shark Bay, there's not really anywhere you can go to have a more friendly zip code. That whole coast of Western Australia has lots of tiger sharks. You have dolphin populations throughout it. So, if you were to pick up and move, there's no reason that you would necessarily do better. And then if you think from the perspective of a lot of animals, there's a big benefit to knowing your local area. So for dolphins that are kind of learning the ropes of their home range for many years with their mother, going to a new place with new animals you don't know, with an ecosystem you don't necessarily know in terms of how to get food or navigate predators, is probably more dangerous than doing what you can where you are. And I think one of the other things is although these animals, like 75% of them have these bites, 10% attacked each year, quite an impressive number are actually surviving that. It's not like we have adult dolphins going missing left, right, and center. So it is a risk, but they are managing to mitigate it. And the calves are getting hit fairly quickly, but still the females are cycling again very quickly and getting pregnant. So it's not like they're not getting any of their calves to be weaned successfully. So it's a great question, but I think it's the familiarity of a local area combined with there's not necessarily anywhere that's much better. But great question. Okay, so it turns out with these bites, if you look at the tooth impressions there, and then just kind of what sharks are in the bay, the sharks in Shark Bay are really at risk from tiger sharks. And around the world, this is one of the few species that really is a major threat to big animals like dolphins. And I'll talk a little bit more about tiger sharks generally later, but they really are built for attacking big prey because not only are they very large, growing to 4.5 meters plus, which is 15 feet and bigger, but once they hit about 10 feet, they start, feels like for every 10 centimeters in length, they're putting about that same amount in width. So they get very bulky. The mouth is right at the end of their snout, which makes it easy to grab big prey. And then their teeth are curved and serrated. So getting through dolphin blubber or even turtle shells is no problem at all for a tiger shark. So one of the big questions that I was really interested in after we saw, number one, that all these dolphins had scars over them, and I'm not sure if he's the luckiest or most unlucky dolphin at the time, but one that was named Smokey had been attacked at least 8 separate times by sharks, but was still out there. And I was really interested in, how do these dolphins navigate getting enough food while trying to stay as safe as possible from those sharks. And when you look at the area in Shark Bay, and you can see Monkey Maya, which is the place where the dolphins come in to get fed right here, it's a patchwork of these shallow beds that are usually less than, they're always less than 4.5 meters deep, and usually less than about 2.5 meters, so less than 7 feet deep, almost entirely covered by seagrass. Those those shallower areas are surrounded by deeper waters that are kind of in here between the banks. Now the depths of the study site, most oceanographers laugh at me because it's 10 meters or about 30 feet deep is the deep, but they're very different habitats because they are not just deeper, they are almost entirely covered by sand. So not as much, probably not as much fish there. The other thing that is important in this whole story is that although Shark Bay can look crystal clear when you're just looking in from the top and seeing that little bit, it's not the Bahamas. And so on a good day, you may have 8, 9, 15 feet of visibility would be a ton, but most days it's less than 6 feet of visibility. So you don't have a really good ability to see what's out there if you're a dolphin. You have echolocation, but remember that's in a fairly narrow cone in one direction. And so you've got lots of blind spots still there in the murk where something like a tiger shark could sneak up on you. So kind of with this patchwork, what we did, because I'm a scientist, I'm required 2 things. I have to show you at least one graph during this talk, and have to tell you a bit about the methods. We divided the study site up into the deep and shallow areas. So you can these white boxes show the kind of the shallow banks. The areas between them are the deeper waters. And then within the shallow banks, we defined what we call more the interior parts of these banks. So these are the waters that are shallower and they're far from the deep water. And these are kind of ecologically different from the edges of the bank where dolphins and dugongs and other animals, have quick access to quickly swim into deep water. It's also because those edge habitats are more between 7 feet and 15 feet deep. They've got a little bit more room to outmaneuver a tiger shark, because tiger sharks with that big bulky head are not exactly good at turning on a dime. So an animal like a dolphin and even a sea turtle can easily outmaneuver a tiger shark when you're in those edge areas, but in the shallow interiors, there's really nowhere to maneuver to get away. So in approaching this question, one of the first things we did was look at the base of the ecosystem. So we mapped where the seagrass was. We went and took samples of the seagrass to see, how nutritious it was for the dugongs, not the dolphins. And then we went out and we measured the fish. When we were doing the bulk of this project, it was when the little cameras you can get on Amazon today for $40, that used to be $3,000. So using video cameras to map fish wasn't going to happen. So we created these chicken wire monstrosities, to which I donated more blood than I would like to recount, to put out traps and see where we caught the fish. Later in the project, we've started to use video cameras where it's quite a bit less invasive and helps us pick up other species of fish. To study the tiger sharks, you have to catch them. And so we use these lines called drum lines. You set them out and only leave them out for a couple hours at most. And in Shark Bay on a good day, if you go back after a couple hours on 10 lines, excuse me, you'll already have up to 7 sharks. And the average size will be about 10 feet long. When we've caught the sharks, as long as you're driving forward slowly, these sharks are actually very calm next to the boat, even very large ones. This lets us measure the sharks, collect blood samples to get a sense of where they're eating and what they might be eating. And then we can let them go on their way. We'd originally hoped we could figure out if there were more sharks in the shallow or deep waters based on where we caught them. It turned out that didn't work because of this critter. This is the most frightening animal in Shark Bay. This is the Norwest blowy. And with those teeth, yes, we have been chased out of the water when diving as they try to nip at you. And it turns out when you try to put hooks in shallow waters, some of these will come along within minutes and eat all your bait off. And it's very hard to catch tiger sharks with bare hooks, although it has happened. So we had to turn to other methods to see whether tiger sharks preferred shallow or deep waters. And for that, we used, at the time, National Geographic's Critter Cam. These systems are video cameras and environmental data sensors packaged in one. I'm going to date myself here. Back in the old days, we had to use these things called video tapes. We didn't have digital video, so that meant that the cameras had to be very big. And so working with 10-foot long sharks was about the smallest we worked with. But still, these cameras deployed on the sharks would let us track them and then see the habitat around to see whether they were using shallow waters or deep waters, and then use some statistical methods to see if they actually preferred one habitat and another, or were just kind of randomly using the habitats. It also really showed us that tiger sharks are really, really lazy hunters. They spend most of their time just swimming around, and they might turn and swim towards something like a sea turtle, and we'd get excited that it might eat the sea turtle or attack it, and the sea turtle would lift its head and look at the shark, and the shark would say, forget it, and turn away. And so these sharks are really relying on stealth and a quick attack, and they're not just chasing around prey all over the place. So we have now, with the fish traps and the shark work, we kind of now are able to get a sense of where the dolphin's food is found and where the areas are that are most dangerous for the dolphins, to see where the dolphins spent their time and how they might change their behavior based on, or change where they spend their time based on their behavior. We set out lines in the different habitats and drove up and down those and made counts of all the air-breathing animals we saw, including dugongs, sea turtles, sea snakes, and the dolphins. When we saw the dolphins, we'd actually also go to the groups, take the photos to see which animals were there, measure what behaviors they were in, and collect whatever other data we could on the dolphins at the time and get the exact location where those dolphins were found. So to not show graphs, just to kind of give you a sense of what we found, the first thing we found is it didn't matter whether it was winter or summer, there is more fish in these shallow seagrass beds. About 3 times as much fish in those shallows as the deep water, if not a little bit more. And so if the dolphins are really interested in getting a meal, they should be spending their time in those shallow waters predominantly. But things are not always the same when it comes to tiger sharks. And what we found was that in warm months, it doesn't matter what year it is, there are a lot of tiger sharks around in the warm months. But in the cold months, it depends what year it is. In some cold months, you actually have no sharks there at all. And in other cold months, you have a fairly decent number of sharks still present. And this is really cool because what it lets us do is not just say, what are dolphins doing in the summer and the winter, but actually saying, what are dolphins doing in periods when sharks are there or sharks are not, that's not tied only to season. So it lets us get rid of some of the potential confounding factors that might influence dolphins. The other thing we found is that these tiger sharks love shallow water. See, here's my required graphs. I got that in, right? They're not going to take my scientist card away yet, I guess. And what we found is that the sharks love shallow waters. They especially love to run the edges of those banks, but they'll still spend more time in the middle of the banks in the interiors than out in the deep channels or the open habitat. So this means the dolphins face a big dilemma when the sharks are there, which is they can go to where there is plenty of food, but it's also more dangerous, or they can try to kind of eke out a living in safer areas in deep water, but they're just not going to get as much fish. So what we see is, it was really interesting, and I'm gonna, isn't it great when you distill 5 years of work down to like 2 cute slides? Well, that's what we've tried to do here. And what we found is that when no sharks are there, the dolphins are where the food is. So about 3 times as much food in the shallows, about 3 times as many dolphins feeding in the shallows. And this is actually the pattern we saw in my first semester of my PhD. I thought I'd figured stuff out, and then it got warm and sharks showed up and it all went out the window. It's actually a lot more fun when we're wrong than when we're right, because then we get to figure things out more. when the sharks showed up, remember they're a lot more common hunting in the shallows. It turns out that almost all of the dolphins, a lot of them bail out and they stop feeding as much in the shallows. And instead they're feeding in the deep. It's just not worth the risk of running into a tiger shark. Instead, they spend a lot more time in the deep water foraging, where it's a little harder to get food, but they're safer. It does turn out there's one age sex class that keeps feeding in the shallows a little more than others, and that is juvenile males. And this might make sense because for juvenile males, forming a strong alliance could be really important, especially early on. And so that extra energy early in life might be more important to males than females in their eventual reproductive success. And hopefully getting back to Richard and some of the long-term data sets on dolphins will help us start to answer some of these questions of how does behavior early in life affect success later on. And Michael Crutzen has been doing genetic studies to look at the success of different males. And so kind of eventually we hope to put all these data sets together to answer some of those questions. And so what it seems like is that, these tiger sharks are very important in terms of changing the behavior, especially the habitat use decisions of dolphins. And I just want to end talking about, it's not just about dolphins because, that's kind of interesting, but we also wanted to know, how do these sharks affect the rest of the ecosystems? And so, if you look at the rest of the ecosystem of Shark Bay, it is that foundation of seagrass. Two major grazers there are the dugong and green sea turtles, both of which are prey for tiger sharks. Just another cool thing about tiger sharks, like I mentioned, those teeth can cut straight through turtle shell. If you're a tiger shark and you've cut through turtle shell and eaten a turtle, you got a problem. You got all that tasty turtle in your stomach, but you also have turtle shell. But tiger sharks can actually turn their stomach inside out through their mouth once they've digested the good parts, shake the shell out, slurp their stomach back down, and they're ready to go again. Lunchtime, anybody? So, these tiger sharks can really eat. They're great at eating big prey. And you might expect them to affect the behavior of these other big prey, because those are also, like dolphins, animals that live long lives and have to invest heavily in survival rather than just trying to reproduce quickly. Tiger sharks also love their version of spaghetti, sea snakes. I guess they can just slurp them right down. And you also, when you look inside tiger sharks, you gently remove prey with water from living tiger sharks. You also see that they will eat cormorants. They will eat the stingrays. And as I mentioned, the dolphins. So we have this complex ecosystem, and we really want to know what happens if you remove tiger sharks from this. And through a lot of studies with lots of my students like Derek Burkholder, Jeremy Vaudo, Rob Nowicki, and collaborator at he's now at University of Washington, Aaron Wersing, and Jordy Thompson, we pieced together this ecosystem, and got a shout out to Larry Dill, my PhD supervisor, who's been a collaborator, a leader in all this work the whole time. We've actually found out that what happens is that these tiger sharks cause all of these different prey species to modify their behavior to invest in safety. So they don't feed in the middle of these banks very often. They go to the safer spots. And that means that in these areas where tiger sharks are common, the seagrass grows up to be more like sea bushes. And that provides tons of habitat for fish, crabs, and the animals that grow up to be even things that people want to catch. It's also seagrass that sequesters a lot of carbon in the sediment. But in the habitats where you don't have as many, or where the tiger sharks aren't as dangerous, it pushes the animals into those areas. And instead of getting these sea bushes with lots of habitat value and carbon sequestration value, you end up with what looks like a very finely cut lawn. And that's because there's so much pressure on these seagrasses. When we put out exclosures or cages to keep the grazers from feeding in these areas, it turns out the seagrass grows up to be a sea bush. So it's not that the seagrass can't grow there, it's that these behavioral interactions that all start with tiger sharks and go through the pathways with dolphins, dugongs, and sea turtles influences the dynamics of the whole ecosystem. And really interestingly, it's more about how the sharks scare these prey than it is about how many of these prey the sharks eat. Malcolm, want to jump in again?
Let's see if the unmute will
Yeah,
go
got it.
for it. There he is.
Okay. Yes. A number of years ago, I interviewed a gentleman on the other coast of Florida, the East Coast, who said he had been rescued from a potential shark attack by a dolphin. I recorded the story. It's about 6 minutes long. I would not necessarily have believed him, but he said that a witness had been the young Truly Nolan, the manager of the pest company. So I wrote a letter to Mr. Nolan. He substantiated the guy's story. Have you ever seen any instances of dolphins attacking sharks to prevent or rescue from a shark attack on one of their own, or defending any other species?
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time. I need to update it, but running this down, and it turns out most of the stories of the dolphins beating up and killing sharks are fairly unsubstantiated, and it seems to vary a lot by context. So Janet Mann did see dolphins in Shark Bay kind of come in and usher away a shark from a calf that it just killed, but this was actually a very small tiger shark. Relatively speaking, so only like 7 feet long, which is kind of still in the eel stage, so it can kill a calf, but really isn't a threat at all to adults. And so they kind of chased it off. There are pretty well substantiated stories of dolphins kind of hurting or somewhat mobbing a shark, a little bit like like crows will do or small birds will do to hawks. But Richard and I saw one interaction in Shark Bay where a moderate sized, it was a white shark, approached a group of females and calves, swam right to the front of him. And this should have been a situation where it should have been all about defense, because the shark didn't make an attack. It just kind of blundered into him. And we did get the whole thing on video. Those dolphins, including mothers, just all scattered and went their own way and just leapt away for many minutes. And it was every dolphin for themselves. So, I suspect that if a shark is a threat to adult dolphins, a lot of times they're not going to gang up. They're going to use swim away quickly as their tactic. But in other situations where it's less dangerous, they certainly have the ability, like other smaller prey, to chase them away. In terms of dolphins helping other species, I'm not up as much as I'd like to be on some of those. So I'd be, certainly curious to hear the stories and see, what shark might have been involved, what size. But we also know that dolphins, when it comes to smaller sharks, will beat the living turf out of them or even kill them, not necessarily because they see them as a threat, but just because dolphins will beat up on smaller species sometimes. And, we see this in the dolphins in Shark Bay, where they'll get those big blowfish, or they'll get fish that they never eat, but they'll just almost use them as toys and whack them around. And that's been seen, with small sharks in some cases. But usually if it's going to be a big, super dangerous shark, they're going to try to avoid the contact. Excellent. So I'm almost done, and then we'll answer any other questions, but thanks very much for the question. So I just kind of wanted to end that, why does this matter? And it matters a lot because shark populations are in real trouble. And especially some of the big species that are likely the most interactive, like tiger sharks, in some places maybe down 90% or more in their populations. And so it's really important that we get a better handle on what is a loss of sharks going to mean for ecosystems generally, or amazing species like dolphins. And we also know that ecosystems are being stressed in other ways. So this is what a seagrass bed in Shark Bay would have looked like in the early 2000s. But we had a marine heat wave, so an extreme climatic event hit, and it turned the seagrass beds into this. And the seagrass has not been recovering as fast as we'd like. And it from all the work that we've done subsequently, it looks like the tiger sharks being present is actually going to be very important for this ecosystem bouncing back because of how the sharks influence the behavior of other species. But we're seeing that these heat waves are changing the behavior of some of the species like dolphins in Shark Bay. And when you get ecosystems that look like this, where there's less fish, the dolphins are now not able to invest as heavily in staying safe from sharks, and now have to go into those areas that might be more dangerous so they can get a meal. And we're just, different people are starting to try to work on that question now of, what will the stresses from the bottom up mean for dolphins and the rest of Shark Bay? But around the world, we're dealing with challenges of climate effects to the bottom of ecosystems and overfishing and other conservation threats to the top. And so there's kind of a big lift for us, not just to understand how systems work, but to try to restore them to what they used to be like so that they can be resilient in the face of climate change.
Quick question before you go on, Mike. That I missed what year you said that heat event was, and then how long did it last to do that much damage?
So it was about 3 months in 2011, where temperatures were several degrees C in the middle of summer, a couple degrees centigrade above kind of what the high normally would be. So it took very little time to knock out the seagrass and then, just keep it there. And there were a couple years where it was warmer than normal. And so, you can see that kind of this is the percent cover of sites. And, it was like 80% of the sites had almost 100% cover. And then it drops down in 2012 to basically none at all. And even you can see in 2013, and we're not seeing that tick up a whole lot more right now. And some experiments that Rob Nowicki did, we found that when we simulated what would happen with grazing by especially turtles and dugongs if sharks were not there, it suggested that the whole system would go from this kind of sea bush habitat to that tightly mowed lawn with all those weedy species. So the potential's there to have real catastrophic effects. The good news is Western Australia is probably one of the best places on the planet for intact tiger shark populations still. And so our expectation is that the system should be able to bounce back, partially because you have those big predators there. But if you didn't, we would certainly expect it to kind of go back to to never go back to what it was.
Wow.
And actually that's what I've got for everybody today. So, it's been fun to take a tour of Shark Bay, and would be happy to answer any questions that people have.
Excellent. We had a few that came into the chat. One, let's see, I find the best order to ask them in. You touched on that just sort of for the dolphins going to a different spot isn't automatically safer or easier to find food. Is the system itself, is it closed? The same dolphins have been monitored and observed for so long. Do you know if they leave the bay?
Yeah, it doesn't look like they leave the bay, and the young dolphins may shift their home range a little bit. Yeah, probably the females stay more similar in their home ranges to their mothers than the males. So the males may disperse a bit, but not a ton. I mean, every so often you'll see new individuals coming in to the bay, but it's more of a overlapping home ranges that kind of go forever. There's no real distinct, this is the population, it ends here, starts here, ends there. It just kind of keeps going and probably goes all around up and down the west coast of Australia. In that inner bay, there's probably not a lot of more transient individuals, but like you see in other places, I wouldn't be surprised if you got to those more open coast areas where you'd have some individuals maybe moving seasonally and others kind of more sedentary. But that's not something that's really been looked at in that inner bay, especially of Shark Bay, where a lot of this work's been done. And now Richard and his crew, and we're talking about how we can spin up even more work with the ecological pieces in the outer parts of the bay, where you start to add coral reefs and different habitats, more schooling fish, and especially interested, to figure out, they're really focused on how do the ecological conditions influence patterns of alliance formation in the males. So, I think some of Michael's students and Richard's students are going to have just super, super cool results coming up in the future.
Excellent. I love that it just keeps going. It's never one person's career that's going to get all the answers.
The cliche is true. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know much at all.
With the group protection questions and whatnot, and the calves being vulnerable in particular to attacks, do you see where experienced moms are less likely to have their calf be attacked, or kind of first calves at the greatest risk?
Yeah, I don't want to say too much because I haven't caught up with Janet recently to see how that story may have changed. I mean, we do know that, even for those beach dolphins, they're just some moms that are, I hate to say it, terrible moms. They don't pay as much attention to their calves and they seem to lose a lot of theirs, where others do very well. So there's probably a lot of variation kind of among females just in being better or worse at keeping their calves alive. But certainly, I mean, you look at Sarasota and some other locations where they follow these long terms, and young mothers do tend to not do as well in keeping their calves alive. And, again, in some areas, I mean, I need to catch up more, and you may weigh in on this, but even issues of like offloading pollutants can be an issue for those younger. So one of the challenges in asking some of those questions, I mean, Shark Bay, we don't have to worry about pollutant loads because, within 400 kilometers, there are probably fewer people than there were on the 747 or 777 those are airplanes for those of you that forgot, since we haven't traveled in so long, but they were taking you over. So there's not much in the way of pollutants there, but in other places, what was the fate of the calf? Is it,
Anyway.
It's hard to know and trace it to sharks because, predation events that are observed are super few and far between. And if you kind of think about it, I mean, film crews are always like, hey, can we go film something getting eaten? And you're like, okay, let's map this out.
Let's lower those filming expectations.
Even if every death is due to sharks, that's, maybe 20 a year get eaten by 24 hours a day. Good luck.
Yeah.
And, we don't know how much of the actual successful where the sharks actually get their mouths on dolphins. Is that during the day? Is it at night? No shortage of questions left to ask in that system.
Yeah. And for those of you who don't know, I should have said this when I introduced Mike. We actually met in person for the first time at DCP's Bimini field site, doing a program for Shark Week. And that was there. Oh, can we come to Bimini and film a tiger shark attacking a dolphin like on Tuesday? Not quite, but we can certainly go out and look for dolphins with scars and discuss what they're after.
Well, the answer is always, of course you can. How's your CGI department?
Yes. Maybe one last question, though I welcome if anyone has another one to throw out there, but this one goes back to the shark end of the research. Did you see any effect that the tags had, particularly that critter cam wasn't small, on the shark behavior or their activities?
We never saw anything on tiger sharks. On other species, we actually, like hammerheads put a camera on at that size and never did it again because they kind of tilted. And it was like, that's why the first times we usually put on for very short deployments to see if animals are going to respond. But, these tiger sharks, they just go back to what they're doing so fast. I mean, we even had one shark that usually what we do is you'd see a shark, you get all the other hooks out of the water, get the camera on and let it go. We had one shark that one day we forgot to take one bait out of the water, and that shark with the camera it swims 5-10 minutes later, and you see it sees the line. It sees the line, follows the line up. It turns out there was about this much bait left on the hook. It's like the eyeball of the fish left on the hook, and that's it. Circles it twice and catches itself. So we didn't really see anything from the cameras or putting other tags on that would suggest that those tiger sharks are changing their behavior too much. I mean, like when we went to Bimini and tried to put cameras on hammerheads, we try to do it on free swimming animals when we can. In Shark Bay, that visibility is too bad to try such stunts. But, these days the cameras are about 1/10 the size of what they were and get 10 times the video. So that's one of the other things that we're doing is always trying to invent the next stage of these camera designs. Is people want cell phones with smaller components. It helps us create newer technologies to study some of these species. And one of the next things we really want to try to do is get get better low light cameras and night vision so we can start to unpack what's going on at depth or after dark.
Yeah. Awesome.
I
Kathleen, was there anything you wanted to add?
I did have one question that I was thinking about as you were showing early on in your presentation, the pictures of the shark bites, the fresh wounds, the healing wounds, the staggeringly healed wounds that were, you know, the mouth of a giant shark. Have you assessed the severity of any of those bites with respect to the potential for survival in the live animals versus maybe because I'm not saying that you probably have, you know, shark bitten carcasses of dolphins washing ashore to say, oh, that one, yeah, that was severe, that was done, and I'm sure it's probably where on the body that mouth opens and bites, and then because I would think that one you showed that healed, I mean, the shark, I would say, didn't actually close and bite and pull, but maybe bit and then opened. You know, we've seen some of those, Kel, in some of the photos you have. And so I didn't know if that was something that you had looked at.
Well, yeah, the thing is that most of the ones that we see with the bites, they survive. You know, we don't really have anywhere it's like horrible bite and they survive a little bit and then die. I mean, I think that for a lot of these, it's either survivable or it's not, kind of right at the front. And, you know, you see horrific wounds that they've gotten through and they may have a giant divot in their body the rest of their life, but they survive. And, you know, I think any animal that's wounded enough that they're really in that much trouble, there are so many sharks in Shark Bay, they won't last.
They're going to be supper.
Too long. I mean, because we almost never see carcasses wash up during months that sharks are around because, you know, nothing hits the beach. It's only in the winter, and, you know, the winters when there are no sharks that we even get carcasses.
Right.
So it's another question to ask more. And I mean, I think Randy Wells has at times suggested, you know, maybe some of these animals even have a little bit thicker blubber than they might need for thermoregulation. Just gets that little more time, because you will see animals that have obviously spun and gotten out and gotten really shredded, but still it's not down to the muscle and they can survive it. Or you get the triple bite where you see it's like the bite and then the release to get a better grip, and you get kind of multiple scars on them.
And is it like in Bimini, we don't see scars on the ventral sides? We don't see scars on the dolphins' bellies, with the hypothesis that bite is not going to be survivable. Do you think that that's likely the same there?
I would say almost certainly, because, you know, because they turn belly up, we were actually able to look at kind of what portion of bellies did we see with wounds versus what portion of flanks. So, you know, they are much less common. And it's probably not because it could be a combination of dolphins see them at the last second and turn belly to them, and then they're more likely to get hit there. But I suspect that any bite that really lands in the ventral area is more likely to be a lethal bite.
Yeah. Well, I'm a dolphin researcher. I don't love sharks biting dolphins, but I love studying shark bites on dolphins. So before I go down a rabbit hole and just turn this into my own private Q&A with you, Mike, we will thank you for your time today. And I will just remind folks of how they can learn more about DCP. So these webinars are recorded, as I mentioned at the beginning, and you can find them on our website under the Education tab. Cleverly, it will be called Webinars. And toward the top, this is an old screenshot, of course, but the schedule for like the next 2 or 3 webinars will be up there as well. You can also find all of the recordings on our YouTube channel, cleverly named Dolphin Communication Project. We also have our podcast, The Dolphin Pod. You can access that on our website or wherever you get your podcasts. And our next dolphin lesson, which is geared towards a younger audience and then just the general dolphin loving public, is Tuesday, November 3rd. And that we're going to quickly recap the how to draw a dolphin, and then we're going to add spots. So look at some individual Atlantic spotted dolphins off Bimini. And then we'll have another deep dive, which is geared towards the older audience on November 5th. And that's with Bernd and Mel Versig. And we're very excited to have been able to reschedule that talk from September. And lastly-ish, our kids science activities are also under that education tab. So these are all free downloadable PDFs. Some of them are activities that your student might need help working through, and then some of them are fun crossword puzzles and jumbles and coloring pages for all ages, even the young at heart. And of course, we're a nonprofit, so I would be remiss if I didn't plug how you can support us, which includes our Adopt a Wild Dolphin program, memberships, t-shirts. When COVID is over, come join us in the field. And of course, stay in touch. You have our email address and where to find us on social media. So thank you all for joining, and a huge thank you to Mike for sharing all of that information with us. We are always happy to see you. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.